All right, you're welcome to Summit. It's the first working day of the week for civil servants, workers across the Federation. That's following the public holidays. Of course, the Eid holidays was on Monday and Tuesday, allowing workers, people to travel across the Federation. Some even took, the holiday took some people outside the country. But today is the first working day, and I want to believe that no excuses. Certainly no excuses. It's been a long holiday. Today, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. So everybody should be at work. It's our midweek edition on Summit, and my name is Banji Busari. Incidentally, Jumoke Michael is not here today. She's, duty calls. Let me say duty calls. She has something very important to do officially for us, and I believe it's something that you'll be interested in by the time she comes back. Today on the program, we actually, like we normally do, we're taking on a very, very important issue, trending national issue. Of course, there are so many of them. We've already thanked God that the holiday went peacefully. No bombings, no killings, no maimings, at least none that we know. None that we know. And the Boko Harams went to sleep. Other people actually, the herdsmen clashes, at least lied low. We never had any incidents throughout the holiday. Yeah, we are back at work now, and I want to assure you this is going to be a very, very exciting moment for all of us, because you are going to be part of this. It's an issue that affects every one of us. But before I bring our guest in, before I actually let you see our guest today on the program, let's go for a short break. When we return, you get to know what we are discussing on today's edition of Summit. Oh yes, you're welcome back. It's still Summit, and like I did tell you before we actually went on that break, it's going to be a topic that should interest every one of us, because it's about labor, it's about workers' welfare. Close to the elections, that's 2019 elections, all workers across all levels actually went into jubilation. That's following the approval of the new national minimum wage. That's a new minimum wage which was put at 30,000 naira. It's been a long battle between the labor unions, as Trade Union Congress, the Nigerian Labour Congress, and several other affiliated unions to actually arrive at the 30,000, and it was more or less a kind of a big celebration for workers that the federal government to agree to 30,000 naira. Of course, there were dissenting voices in some states claiming they had inability to pay. But of course, generally, it was agreed that 30,000 naira was about the lowest that any Nigerian worker, the lowest of them, should take. And that was actually laid to rest. But 6 months, almost 6 months after, there have been these new agitations. Now, when will the implementation of the new minimum wage commence? And that's what we're actually looking at on today's edition of the program. And of course, we don't do it alone. I cannot do it alone. More so that Jumoke is not here. We have a competent person here, somebody who knows, very, very well informed, a public affairs analyst, and somebody who is also an employer of labor, who is an industrialist too, who should be able to actually guide us. Should this drag on or not? Should there be solution? Should there be implementation now or till when? That's why we have on the program today my brother, my friend. Sometimes I mistakenly call him Prince. No, how can I be Oba and be Prince again? Mr. Gbola Oba, it's our pleasure to have you again.
Pleasure is all mine to be honest.
And we cannot thank you enough for actually acceding to our request to be on the program.
Thank you very much.
And like I always say, each time you come on this program, you always leave a very positive impact.
Thank you very
Today is not going to be different, I believe.
I pray so.
I pray so. So, thank you. You're welcome on this edition.
Thank you very much.
So, you've heard it. The new minimum wage, that's 30,000 naira. When is the implementation going to commence? And to actually help you out, 2 days ago, the chairman of TUC Ekiti State, that's TUC Ekiti State, that's Mr. I should be able to get the name soon. The chairman TUC Ekiti, Mr. Shola Adigun, actually made what you may call a threat. That's the federal government, saying that the foot dragging is enough, and the federal government should not take the discussions or the processes concerning the implementation of the minimum beyond August 14. Should not take it beyond August, which is today, Wednesday. He actually gave today as the deadline. And I want to read that as a national stand, as a stand of the TUC trade union, which was one of the major components of the discussion that led to the 30,000 minimum wage. That's the situation as we speak today. Nobody has actually gone on any industrial action. But how do we avert it? That's our focus today. Averting another industrial action in the polity. That's our focus. Mr. Gbola Oba, does it not bother you, for instance, that with all the plethora of problems across the country, we have the Boko Haram, we have the headers, farmers clashes, we have kidnapping, we have banditry, we have so much on our hands. Can we afford to add another industrial action, to the series of crises we have on ground?
A proactive government would do everything possible in view of the fact that there's even a statute that necessitates the relevant action. A proactive government would do something to arrest it. But let's be very honest with ourselves. Can I define the government as proactive as at this juncture, especially on this subject? My honest opinion is that the government has been very, very laid back. The government was literally, and I mean the executive arm of the government, indeed, President Muhammadu Buhari's government was literally cajoled by the 8th Assembly, by the 8th National Assembly to accept 30,000 naira.
No, ninth now.
The 8th.
The 8th.
The one that was prorogued before, yeah, the outgone. It was the outgone assembly that passed the legislation. Have you forgotten? Okay. The 9th Assembly came into...
Okay, yes, very well. Thank you for actually refreshing my memory. Okay, it was the 8th Assembly, outgone assembly.
It was one of the legislative measures that were done at the about the denouement or the epilogue of that 8th assembly. But the two chambers of National Assembly passed the minimum wage legislation with a 30,000 bottom as the minimum wage, when the federal government was fervently hangling for 28,000 naira. You must remember. And that in itself was subsequent to a year-long discussion, tripartite discussion between the federal government, the state governments, and between the federal government, the state governments, on the one hand, as a party, the NECA, Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, which is a canopy body for private sector employers and labor.
Organized labor.
Organized labor. That took more than a year. It was at the backdrop of that the figure of 30,000 first came up, and it was said to be the compromise that was reached after a very elongated period of negotiations that the state governments deliberately attended to with mischief, not wanting the committee to give any concise or reliable report. It was after the report of that committee, led by the former head of service, that the state governments were coming up with all the excuses in the books, all the excuses. Affordability, issue of affordability, issue of likely retrenchment if it was to be enforced, a number of excuses they came up with. Ultimately, the government constituted a committee to look into the recommendations. After the submission of that, because the electioneering period was at hand, it was like the government was cajoled by circumstance to play along with the 8th Assembly that was in itself orchestrating the issue of the minimum wage, not only out of sheer empathy for workers, but as a form of political gimmickry against the executive. So, as at the time the bill was gaining momentum in the two chambers of the National Assembly, the government was still angling. The federal government was still angling for 28,000 naira below the agreed. And labor, labor typical of labor, they also went into some dramatics and whatever. Ultimately, 30,000 was agreed as the figure to be used in the legislation. The president took a while, like he was not going to sign it, like he rejected many of the bills passed by the 8th Assembly, but ultimately, I guess, for political exigencies and, he ultimately signed it. But you know what? The lack of enthusiasm that can be generally discerned now better explains the reluctance of the government in actually playing along with the maturation of the bill and ultimately the assent of the president. So you have a law that the entities that ought to implement it are not quite enthusiastic about seeing the law implemented.
But no mistake must be made here. The president has said it repeatedly. In fact, the issue of the state government's series of excuses put forward not be able to comply with it has actually been discountenanced by the federal government, exemplified by the president, saying that there should be no excuse by any state government not to implement, not to adhere, not to assent to the 30. So would you have said that there was no enthusiasm or the willingness, or if the federal government knew there was no ability to pay, would the 8th Assembly have succeeded with all the dramatics and all that to get the federal government to assent to that bill?
Platitude is an instrument that is often used in politics when much is not expected to be done. So if you want to throw the platitudinous remark of the president at me, I will tell you. But as we speak, he is the president. And you need to read the Nigerian Constitution again. The Nigerian Constitution is one of the very few constitutions on the face of the earth that defines an enormous amount of power for the office of the president. So, if you're talking to me now that the president once remarked or stated that there should be no excuse, I would say, you know what? The federal government, amongst all the governments of the federation, is the biggest employer of labor. What stops the federal government from implementing it if the president is so convinced that it ought to be implemented? And I also took the pain, I took the time to give you the historical analysis of how the federal government ultimately, reluctantly played catch-up to what eventually emanated from the National Assembly as the bill, and that the consent of the president was not in itself very expeditious. So 6 months after he personally signed, and fortunately for him, his mandate has been renewed by the Nigerian electors, the Nigerian electorate. What stops him if you believe that that remark was not so much platitude, but born out of conviction?
Well,
I'm sorry for being the interviewer now, instead of being...
No, you are at liberty to... But let me draw your attention to the fact that irrespective of whatever thinking regarding the attitude of the government, the chairman of the National Salaries, Income and Wages Commission, Richard Gbola, has actually come out to say the delay in implementation of the new minimum wage is actually caused by the labor itself. That the labor is asking for, is making some unreasonable, very, very outrageous demands that may make it impossible for federal government to actually go ahead and implement. He's saying specifically that labor is asking for kind of consequential adjustments.
It's inevitable.
Which may shoot up the wage bill, making it, impossible for even state government to implement. Do you agree or you don't agree? This is beyond the sentiment. These are facts in the public domain, and the labor has not reacted.
It is true, that remark is true to the level of the honesty or the mischief born in the heart of the person that made the remark. And only God is omniscient enough to know his heart.
Really?
Yes. You know why I say, I'll take the pen. The remark cannot be faulted by anybody on the basis of logic. Because inevitably, from the moment the minimum wage bill 2019 was assented to by the president and it became law, inevitably the wage bill of the governments of the federation, and indeed the wage bill of an average employer of labor like myself, will shoot up. Why would it shoot up? The minimum wage before the extant legislation was 18,000. The new minimum wage, statutorily protected by law, hedged by law, it's just that we are in a jurisdiction where people disrespect the rule of law and abuse workers. The minimum wage now in law is 30,000 naira. So inevitably, except you are retrenching dramatically, inevitably, once you used to pay 18,000 and now you are now mandatorily bound by law to pay 30,000, would there not be a spike?
But the argument,
I'm coming.
But the argument is, should it be across board?
I'm coming. I will get to it, sir. Now, inevitably, once you have increased the minimum wage of the lowliest paid worker from 18,000 to 30,000, you must remember that between the window of 18,000 to 30,000, some officers of state or some employees of state used to have their own wages in that bracket. So it would have been impossible to pay the former lowest worker 30,000 and not recalibrate for those who were earning more than the lowest paid, not recalibrate their own wages up to reflect the new shift. It may not be the same percentage, but inevitably, if you are level 04 and I'm level 05, level 04 you used to be on 18, level 05 I used to be on, say, 20. Now that you have been
elevated, so to speak,
by law to earn 30, should I still be on 20? And I'm your superior, I'm your line manager in the place of work. You see bureaucracy? So there must be a recalibration of what I now will earn relative to what you now have protected for you in law. Now, as it's typical, labor would want to swing, the pendulum of labor would want to swing mightily to the side of doing it the same percentage. That if you had increased from 18 to 30, just do the same percentage for
across
board, which inevitably will be choking. I agree with the gentleman.
You agree with him?
To the extent, I said to the extent of the goodwill or the mischief in his heart that only God knows. Now, the other side of it now is, what have they presented to Labour? If Labour is saying do it across the board, have they presented anything to Labour to say, within the context of the revenue profile of the government, this is the recalibration we can do?
I'm also aware, and I know you are aware as well, that the labor we have is so intelligent and very, very intellectual in its approaches to issues, that the labor itself would have probably come out since this issue cropped up to actually put in the public domain. This has been the issue.
No,
this
Labour
is what
Labour cannot put in the public domain. Labour will naturally be engaged with the revenue mobilization, RM,
yes,
with a long tongue twisting. Labour would naturally be engaged with them. We at this juncture at this juncture don't know the minutiae of the figures that they are trading between themselves. But you know what? That in itself is not beyond reasonable and mutual understanding by two parties made up of intelligent, patriotic Nigerians. So I am still sitting there telling you that a proactive government, I started with the word proactive, and a proactive government would have done something about it. But as we speak, this is another dimension that will shock you. I wasn't going to go to it early, but you know, as we speak, there's no substantive Minister of Labour. So any discussion now, any discussion that is being undertaken now, is going to be at best ceremonial.
We have the palm sex there, and the bulk of the work is done by government. Is a continuum.
When we say this, we encourage Baba to be overly laid back. This is a country of 200 million people, literally in a state of war, and as we speak, literally held up in a state of fragmentational insecurity. And when people tend to say, palm sex, do it, and this thing, you are encouraging Baba to be lackadaisical about governance, too laid back, bordering on laggardliness. It is not, something must be promptly done because the situation as we speak, look at when you were doing your prologue, your intro, you were emphatic that it would not be nice for this issue of labor relations, industrial relations,
or industrial actions that is imminent.
It would not be nice for this issue to also conjoin with all the challenging circumstances that we are faced with in the country.
Okay, much of the discussions, much of the blame, most of the time have been laid at the doorstep of the federal government. We seem to be overlooking the role of the state governments, so many of whom have actually come out to give excuses.
No.
I know some have actually boldly come out to say we can pay, we can afford it, and will definitely implement. Do they need the federal government to actually commence the implementation?
As the Constitution of Nigeria is presently construed by the political class, majority of the states, as the Constitution of Nigeria is presently misconstrued, misunderstood, misinterpreted, and misapplied by our political class, especially largely members of the gubernatorial class, it is almost inevitable that the federal government will support some states in paying minimum wage. It's ironic that many of the governors, in fact, virtually all the governors of Nigeria are sitting on literally a pot of gold. But intellectually, many of them don't have the capacity to maximize the potentials of revenue generation by first lifting up their citizenry and two, exploiting the natural resources that God has graciously endowed their states with. So I'm sitting here now and thinking the only thing they are using this minimum wage issue for, which is also good, as a federalist I support them, is to renegotiate the sharing formula of the monies in the federation
federal allocation.
In the federation account.
Of course, you and I know it's a major, let me say, fundamental constitutional issue.
Ironically,
and it will not come by so easily.
Ironically, the president is somewhat accommodating to their agitation.
To the new
but
formula.
The only thing that the gubernatorial class, the class of governors, what do they call themselves?
Governors Forum.
The Governors Forum. The most articulate, potent stratagem that they are using the backdrop of the legislation for is to renegotiate the revenue sharing formula. I support it as a federalist because I am one who believes that we have a perversion of what historically was agreed by our founding fathers, number one, and number two, that the federal government of Nigeria today is the most wasteful government on the face of the earth because it gets enormous amount of resources that it does not seem to know to use.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oba. The issue has been the new minimum wage. Can we afford to have another industry action based on the foot dragging, let me say, on the part of federal government now in implementing
and the state governments
and the state governments as well.
Many of them are not very enthusiastic.
Many of them, they are also, the attitude does not suggest that they are willing to actually meet up with that constitutional responsibility. We'll go on a short break now. Yes, statutory. We'll go on a short break. When we return, of course, we'll allow you to also partake in this discussion. Let us know, what should the federal government do now to avert another industry action? What should the state governments do? Or should they allow the workers to go on the street before they now start addressing and then taking last-minute decisions on how to actually stop it? That's the issue before us this morning. We'll go on the shop, when we return, we'll give you the number to actually participate on the program. Of course, it's still Summit. My name is Banji Busa, and my guest has been Mr. Gbola. It's the time for you now to participate on the program. But before then, I'd like to remind you that our social media platforms are there on the screen. Please follow us on the YouTube, on the Facebook, and other social media platforms. The number to call on the program is, you soon see the number on the screen now. The number to participate, that's, we only accept that's 070-5929-1146. 070-5929-1146. We only, SMS only, please. SMS only, we only accept SMS. That's, please don't call. So many people like to actually, we prefer your SMS. Let me ask, okay. You see, the calls. Say, don't call, please, SMS only. SMS only, please. There's a new, the federal government has come up with a directive that the CBN should stop granting Forex, thank you. Granting Forex, that's with regard to importation of food items. The consequential result of that is that it may lead to maybe inflation, so to speak, because we may not have sufficient food for workers to buy. Do you not think that will also aggravate the issues on the ground?
I will start by being generous with the government first before I go to my opinion. You did not present that fact well enough.
Thank you.
The federal government, the president, whilst entertaining some APC governors who visited him in Daura to celebrate the Eid with him, said that he had instructed the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria to stop issuing Forex to any importer of food. He said he gave that instruction because he was convinced that Nigeria is now in a state of food security, that we now produce enough food to feed ourselves. That's number one, he said. Number two is that he believes, he says that he believes that Forex should now be used for the diversification of the economy so that we will not be solely dependent on the monoproduct, oil, that is the source of our Forex revenue. Now, that was
beautiful.
That was what the president said. And no intelligent human being will fault it. To be honest with you, if you ask me, that is Nigeria in a state of food security. If you ask me that is Nigeria in a state of food security, I would say no. I don't believe that we are in a state of food security yet. Because a number of the staples that we still consume, a number of those staples are still augmented by the ones imported or the ones smuggled into Nigeria, including rice, because the president specifically was talking about, the increased productivity in rice of states like Kebbi, and in its combination, in its very creative and innovative combination with Lagos State, and he mentioned some other states like Ebonyi and Co. The truth as we speak is that as it appertains specifically to rice alone, Nigeria is not in a state of food security because enormous amount of quantity of rice is still smuggled into Nigeria. That one says the position of the president. Number two is that on the one hand, there's a part of me that says, you know what, even when you have not attained a goal, it is not a bad idea for you to say, this is where I will rather hug asceticism than to sustain a phenomenon that is leaking resources, that is making me leak resources and not helping my diversification. So to that extent, I may want to agree with the president as, you know what, it is never a wrong time to call for war against a vice that you have. But you know what? If you say that, some will say, okay, maybe it's about time too. Given the number of universities in Nigeria and tertiary institutions in Nigeria, maybe it's about time we stopped children of the elite going to study abroad, because come to think of it, we are in a state of educational security too. We have enormous amount, hundreds of tertiary institutions. How come virtually all the people in the ministerial class, the senior political class, indeed, as much as people who run entities like the National Universities Commission, seen taking pictures with their own children, either in Canada, US, or UK, and they run universities in Nigeria. You know what? You want to say, let's go the whole hog. Because as Baba believes that we are in a state of security food-wise, we are also in a state of...
Okay, the question is...
Medical tourism. You know what? We do have some of the best doctors in Nigeria. Most of the things they lack is state-of-the-art equipment.
Now, the question is, if and when the federal government decides to implement this new directive.
You know, he said he has given the instruction.
Okay. Now, if by the time it comes on full swing, would it have any consequential effect on the minimum wage or not?
It would be very presumptuous of me not having enough statistical materials to work with to just want to discountenance what Baba has said. I only used rice as an example because I know that irrespective of the perception that we are food secured rice-wise, I know if you've ever gone through some Gbola and some other parts of Nigeria, some other conurbations of Nigeria proximate to our border point, you will know that one of the most smuggled items into this country is rice.
So the government has taken the right decision. But you want
it's a generally right decision.
But what you are actually suggesting is must be backed up with the homegrown food that leads to actually augment what is on ground, particularly on the staple. Now the issue is,
don't go and ask for the dead that killed your father if you are
not. No. Is it doable or not?
It's doable.
Is it doable or not?
Oh, it's doable.
Okay. Let me plead with the callers.
Please. It's doable with the right leadership.
With the right leadership, we have the leadership there.
I'm not saying we don't have the leadership. With the right.
Yes. With
leadership.
The right.
There's never a vacuum in leadership anywhere in the world. Even incompetent leadership is leadership.
Let me plead with our callers, please. We've requested for SMS only. Please, let us restrict ourselves to that instruction so that this will run the way it should. So you are saying that when we have the right leadership, every other thing will fall in place. Please stop calling us. Please send SMS. It will at least is the right way to go. Let me take this before you actually. This is from he didn't state his name. He said, why can't the president, should have said, be responsible, see what senators are taking home with the economy that has collapsed, and they have refused to implement minimum wage. Well, that's it. Our economy has not collapsed. Nobody has said that, and our economy has not collapsed. Has it?
No,
the economy has not collapsed.
On paper, our economy has not collapsed. But organically, to the person who has written it, I don't know his circumstance. Because you see, when people like us are talking, or when people in government are talking, they will say, "Hey, GDP, gross domestic product." But you know what constitutes the GDP? You know what constitutes the GDP? Your productivity, my productivity, and this callers and this message senders productivity. And if it is not well by him, so that is why I work more with FDP, family domestic productivity. In a family.
Let me quickly take this, sir. Mr. Isampo Uwe Sito says the problem is for why labor is not acting well and they are, I didn't get that. I didn't quite get that. That's from Sipo. Maybe you should restate what you want to tell us. Oh, sorry, would these people allow? Okay. Why is federal government why is federal government cajoling workers over the new minimum wage? Is it because Oshiomhole is a stakeholder and Tinubu Ayo from Ota? That's Ayo from Ota. That's his opinion. Oshiomhole is chairman. That's Adams Oshiomhole is the chairman of the ruling party. He's not part of the executive. So I don't know why he's linking. He's linking. That's his opinion. So, what is the way out? What are the windows of dialogue, of resolutions to this imminent industrial action that you see, that you think you can put at the doorstep of the parties?
The larger part of the lever is actually in the hands of the federal government. With a degree of, with a relatively more pronounced degree of proactivity, the president inviting the leadership of Labour to Aso Rock. Gentlemen and ladies, I am the president of Nigeria. I also came from a background of struggle before God graciously put me here. You know what? I empathize with the average Nigerian worker, and I really want to see this implemented. Trade ideas with me, but the truth is that we cannot afford a recalibration that will reflect the same percentage of jump from 18 to 30,000, because this is the realistic situation of Nigeria, a budget that was made with the projection of $60 per barrel. $60 per barrel of oil. Brent, our own type of oil, is now having $56 per barrel as reality in the marketplace. Engagement, communication, a relationship that defines respect, a relationship that in defining respect also shows empathy from the leader of the country would go a long way to soften labor. You understand what I'm saying? And once they see genuineness and proactivity, it will be easy to manage. But often, Baba seems to be aloof, even when those...
You have made the suggestion. I think, allow me to just take this. Good morning, that says, sir. The federal government of Nigeria are trying for their workers. Look at the paramilitary agencies. The government of Nigeria increased police salary and left other agencies. This can cause interagencies conflict because please advise the government to correct. Thanks. You didn't state your name there. They said there is disparity. That's in the wages and salaries amongst the agents. That's his opinion. I'm asking, why is the industrial action always the first option for labor?
We also have a pronounced degree of incompetence, intellectual anemia, indeed lack of vision in labor leadership in Nigeria. Indeed, let me be, I wanted to be a bit this thing, but indeed, for most people in labor leadership in Nigeria, it is a game of opportunism for self-aggrandizement and self-enrichment. So, in an atmosphere where all these Malay are congregating at the doorstep of labor leadership, you see what we have, Odongbodoru. If I had earlier in all my remarks defined the government to be laid back, not proactive, not intellectually engaging. So
you want to extend it to the labor too?
Look, labor, the case in labor is even worse. You know why? Because as we speak now, the Nigerian Labour Congress is the behemoth amongst the labor unions, but we know that the labor ranks is disintegrating as a result of vaulting ambition and materialism by leaders of labor.
Of course, you have TUC there. You seem not to mention TUC, Trade Union Congress.
I said NLC is the biggest, but apart from TUC, at the last election of the incumbent president of NLC, a phalange also broke out, headed by our friend, the former PSCM man. That phalange too is now, although not recognized by NLC, but in government negotiations is now called in. And you know what? The primary reason is not ideological, is more self-enrichment, myopia, and lack of...
So we cannot afford another union, another labor union. Okay, let me...
Proliferation for proliferation's sake, or proliferation that translates to the positive impactation of the welfare of workers.
We actually must be coasting home now. But let me quickly take this. But let me urge you, anytime you want to send us message, please let us know you. Identify yourself and your location. I understand the high level of corruption in the country is, but is Nigeria as rich as we think? That's a poster. That's a poster from you. You've alluded to it. You said it. That we can hardly...
It's a fantastic question. You know why it's a fantastic question? We are a rich people. We are like the children of a mega landlord who, out of ignorance and lack of ability to beat the curse of rent seeking, we are now living as paupers.
Thank you very much, Taoba. This is just, the discussion has just commenced. Labor has not gone on strike. We are only trying to see how we can preempt it, how we can avert it, so that after holidays, we can fully resume our work without any distractions. I most sincerely thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
You've always been at the service of our nation, offering ideas.
Yeah, you have always been gracious.
I believe that these ideas have actually been used by our leaders. The program has been summed, and my name is Banji Busari. Thanks for being a part of today's edition of the program. See you again very soon. That's on Monday. Bye-bye.